This is episode 8 of Pucks, Putts, and Properties. As always, Mark Strand with my co-host Danny Taylor. Century 21 Heritage Group is our brokerage that we represent. We're going to start off with some puck and review the World Junior Hockey Championship. Obviously, Canada had a real tough go this year in the 2025 World Juniors. Danny, go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, back-to-back quarterfinal exits. I can't remember a time since I've been growing up that Hockey Canada has been a place like this where they've gone back-to-back. Not even a semifinal berth. It's not in a good place, to say the least, with Hockey Canada. They've got their own stuff to figure out. But even just from, of course, there's the arguments of like who should have been on there, who should be. But even just from the player standpoint, I think they underdelivered, to say the least, and I know they're getting they're feeling the flack from social media on how their performance was. But even just from like a penalty standpoint, we were so undisciplined. By far, the team that took the most penalties, and the international reffing is different from your regular reffing in the OHL, but even in your quarterfinal games, they're still taking 9-10 penalties a game. And it's like, what the call is. You can't really body check a guy. You got to go stick on puck. Like, it was nothing new. They've had plenty of exhibition games. Like, that was probably the most disappointing to me, is like, how it's going to be called, because you're anytime you really touch somebody, you're going to get a penalty. So you almost have to play as if it's non-contact and you rub them out. So I was disappointed with the lack of adjustments, because you get into these wars and it's like, you better be able to adjust to what's going on, whether who you're playing or how the game's being played. And I didn't see any of that. So I think everybody in Canada is a little disappointed. And I'm not sure where to go from here, but I don't know. What did you see, Mark?
Yeah, obviously goal scoring was also an issue. So yeah, it's really just taking undisciplined penalties and not putting the puck in the net. Like, I can't believe we lost to Latvia. Like, that's just mind blowing. Latvia has really come on the last bunch of years, but still losing that game is honestly, from a team standpoint, the players, coaches, it's got to be a little bit embarrassing. The parity in this tournament has really come together, but still losing to Latvia in 2025, 20 years ago, that would have never been on the script that this could even be possible.
But it's not as if Latvia completely outplayed Canada. I think the shots were like 52 to like 20 some. In saying that, I don't know how many chances Canada did get, say, from a one-timer perspective, because a lot of them were from outside. Goalie could see it. Goalie didn't have to move. You get a competent goalie that is a first shot goalie, like, they're going to make those saves. So I'm surprised there wasn't any more adjustments. Be like, hey, maybe we don't take that easy shot and take a little more time to make that one-timer pass. And you try to get it in a higher scoring position, where you'd rather have 21 timers from the slot than 50 shots from the outside, but that's not dangerous. So again, I think you can speculate all you want when you're hindsight, but I'm surprised to see there wasn't many adjustments in that to try to maybe penetrate that box and really get an inside shot on there. But needless to say, it shouldn't happen.
Now, what's the typical preparation as a team for one of these championships, for like team practices and really coming together as a team? Because, I mean, flip side, had they won gold, we'd never be being critical like this. But this is obviously not the case here. So we're going to be critical. It seemed that the team never really gelled together and really were knowing where the puck should be flowing to, and in all your systems in place. It just seemed like they were sort of running wild a little bit in my very amateur eye of analyzing hockey.
You'd be right in that. And Hockey Canada is known for trying to you're taking more character and personality traits as opposed to just high-end skill. And that, you could say, is the argument. But I mean, it didn't look like they took the best players that they could get, and it doesn't look like they took the team that gelled the best together anyway. So when you add both of them together, You unfortunately got the result that we did, but I'm optimistic. I do think like our high end talent, I still think is high. Like we were left out with Bedard and Celebrini, who's in the NHL. But even in years past, there's always like 2 or 3 Canadians that didn't go to World Juniors because they're playing for an NHL team. So I do still think Canadians actually breed, some of the best in the world. And I mean, there's never been more of a spotlight now on the 4 nations coming up with Canada, US, Finland, Sweden, to see where our top of the best on best, essentially, to see where Canada is on that. So lots to talk about here in the next 2 months.
Yeah, and for me, looking at hockey at a very macro level in our country, you and I have talked about this. Is the cost of hockey hurting who we can choose from to develop players? Because it seems like the families that can afford to play elite hockey are the kids now that have a shot at it. Like, it's really limiting to a family that can't afford to, we talked about it, $400 for a stick now. I don't know how much your kids' skates are.
Yeah, I mean, by the time you end up your registration, ice costs, and then you do an extra skates as far as like development skates, so you do more on top of what the team does, it adds up. And it's not only does it add up financially, but it adds up with your time. So like getting your kids to practice on like during a week, and if you've got multiple kids doing multiple things, like you need grandparents too. So not only do you need parents like dual income that almost make 6 figures a year to have your son play on the competitive team with all the extras, but you need the driving support too, because a lot of these practices are at like 3:30, 4 o'clock. So
right.
It's tough to make and tough to do as a parent, no question. So we are limiting ourselves to the top end talent. But I will give you another story, and I don't think we've talked about this, is Michael Bunting. So Michael Bunting never played AAA all the way growing up. He was a high school hockey player, and then one of the dads on a GTHL team paid for his hockey year, for his U18 year, and then that Bunting played in the OHL 2 years after that, and then within a couple of years, he's playing for the Toronto Maple Leafs. So there are stories for kids to make it that didn't come up from that AAA background doing all the extras, but I think they're just few and far between. And it's really sad to see where hockey is in Canada, because I know in other countries it's not like this. It's the fees are a lot lower, and if people need help with gear and whatnot, a lot of the times these organizations hand down gear for kids that need skates or gloves or even sticks. So it was nice to see in my travels in Europe that it's provided, which is great. But I think Canada is broken on that with the affordability of minor hockey, unfortunately.
Yeah, and the type of player that you develop from I would say underprivileged, but it's really just of normal income would be different than your I have to assume that the youth that comes through a wealthy family, like the grit might be a little bit different. And you even mentioned to me a kid that grows up in a small town versus a big city, like the type of player could be different too.
Yeah, I see it because just with my oldest one, playing against teams in Toronto as opposed to playing teams out in Barrie, out in the Kawarthas, they're different kids. Like you get some big, strong boys that have like man strength, and they're like 11 years old when you're playing these farmer boys.
Yeah, I grew up on the farm is what I was thinking.
Right? They're farmer boys, and like
Yeah.
you can come from money on a farm. Like a lot of farms are profitable, so it's not privilege. So it's, I don't want to say it's the money, but sometimes it's the habitat from which you grow up in. So right. I do see a lot of softer Toronto kids and vice versa. So I think you can see a bit of both, but I think you see more like the city kids to the farm boys from what I've seen on the ice is a big difference, no question.
Yeah, it just seemed to me that the urgency or the hate of losing wasn't quite there on this team. I can't remember if it was the quarterfinal or the Latvia game that they seemed to just press at the last minute. It's like, okay, well, like, where was this the rest of the game? Why is it all of a sudden urgent now? Like, did you think you were just going to show up on the ice and it was an auto W, or?
I think you nailed it right on the head there. I think they didn't pick enough kids that hate to lose more than kids that just love to win. I would
Right.
rather have a player that hates to lose more than they like to win or love to win.
Right.
I think it's
Okay.
a completely different mentality. And when you listen to a lot of the greats, the hatred of losing is just through the roof. And that's when you get the most competitive hockey player, in my opinion.
Okay. Something I've noticed, we have a shortage in goalies in Canada, like professional goalies right now. We've talked about this. However, my hometown of Thunder Bay, Ontario, has produced 3 or 4 very good goalies. George, who was the Team Canada goalie this year, and I really don't feel that the goaltending was the absolute downfall of this team. Could there have been a puck or two that could have been stopped? Sure, but was that the reason they lost? Absolutely not. You got Matt Murray, he's from Thunder Bay. Blackwood's from Thunder Bay, and I'm missing one other.
Those are very, very solid goalies, right?
Yeah. So there is one pocket in Canada right now that is actually producing goalies. I'm not sure if there's a reason for it. I'm obviously living in Kingston now for as long as I have. I'm a bit disconnected from the Thunder Bay area, certainly the hockey community, but I'm wondering if there's some sort of development that might be going on up there.
Development, or even just the habitat of just being a really laid back guy. I've known you for almost a year and a half now. I know you're fairly laid back, and I feel like most people out east too, like they have that common trait of being very laid back. I think it takes a special breed to be very successful at goaltender, and I think being laid back is one of them. I certainly was not, but having that as your personality would certainly help with the stress that comes with the position.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay, let's that's our puck talk. Let's go on to some putt talk.
Yeah,
PNC Championship. That this is the family 2-person tournament that they have right before Christmas, and we've had Team Woods and Team Langer duel it out in the playoff, which is obviously a huge draw to this event. Is that Tiger plays with his son Charlie. They have now for 4 or 5 years, and you know, Charlie's grown so much. He hits it so hard now, and we're so intrigued to see his game develop over the years. And obviously, Tiger's just he just brings so much to the game and so many eyeballs on any event that he's a part of. The big controversy was that Bernhard Longer, who's still an amazing Champions Tour golfer, I think he's probably mid to late 60s now. He so they have your tee selected based on age in this tournament, and Bernhard's way up playing a forward tee based on his age. And the controversy was that he's just got such an advantage because he's still fit, he still hits it very, very well, and he still wins on the Champions Tour, which is a 50 age mark, and he's 15, 16 years past being eligible for this tour, and he still wins events out there. So he's just such a strong player, and playing from those forward tees, it gave Team Longer such an advantage. And this criticism really comes from everyone wanting to see Charlie and Tiger win the event, which I do believe they're going to eventually win it, but everyone wants to see them win. So there was criticism on the tee selection for Bernhard Longer. Something they could do versus age is like your club head speed, or what's your average drive. They could look at that versus age, but I mean, you got to
handicap too, right? Like handicap's got to be a big factor in that, no?
Well, that's difficult with the pros, right? Because they don't necessarily carry a handicap. I think tee selection, and even as amateur golfers, the tee you should select is based on how far you hit it rather than your handicap. That's my opinion.
Okay.
Because you could have a higher handicap golfer that produces a lot of club head speed, And they could have the opportunity to reach like the majority of the par fours from the forward tee. So I actually do think it is club head speed that should predominantly determine the tees you play. That's my personal opinion on it.
Well, I respect it, but I don't like it, because I can tell you, if you
Okay.
try to get me back there on the golf course with the back tees.
No. I would say that your tees are decided by how much club head speed you generate.
Okay. So my stepdad, Nigel, thinks that if you can hit it to the 150 mark on most par fours, like that's kind of where you should be. But if you're like 200 yards away consistently on a par four, like that's, you need to move up, is kind of like his rule of thumb.
Yeah. From a recreational standpoint with golfers, it's,
Yeah.
I just say play the tees that you find most enjoyable.
Yeah. Right.
Like you're playing for fun. So make it fun.
Absolutely.
It's not complicated.
Can we talk about how far Charlie actually hits it now? Like how far?
Yeah, he's pretty close to Tiger. He's getting pretty close.
So is he hitting the 300 mark? Because that's kind of like the benchmark.
He can hit a 300 for sure.
Like but like McIlroy, they're like what, consistently 350, 360?
Yeah, well, Rory's on another level with the way he hits driver. Yeah, Rory can stretch it out to 350, no problem. Tiger, when he hits one good, it's over 300. I would say Charlie probably averages 275, 280 would be my guess right now. But he's still going to grow a little bit more and become stronger. So
like he's not even close to college, is he? Or is he in high school?
He's in high school. Yeah. I think he'd be 16, 17 now.
Yeah. And like when can you turn pro? Like, do you think we'll see him here in like 2021, or do you think he'll do 4 years university and then go?
He's a strong player, but he wouldn't. And he's certainly going to obviously get a golf scholarship to some elite school. However, he's not ready for pro ranks. Like let's not confuse this right now. And I want to see him take a route that gives him an opportunity to be successful. Yes. Does he want to play the tour? It really seems like he does, but I want to see him take the proper steps to give himself a chance to develop into being a successful professional golfer.
Yeah. Like I'm sure he's winning tournaments now. Right.
He is. It's not on the regular though. He's not an absolute standout for his age in the US, right? There's players that are better than him.
But golf's in a better spot than when Tiger was.
Oh my goodness. Yeah.
Like, so it's not even close, right?
Yeah. Like Tiger was really the start of professional golfers working out in the gym and bettering themselves that way.
Yeah.
Like before Tiger, no one worked out,
but
right?
They're all doing it now. Like they're all
doing it now. Yeah. I mean, you have your anomalies, which I love, by the way. The anomalies.
I do too. There's a couple.
I met John Daly down at the Masters this past year, and he's one of those guys that I absolutely love that took a unorthodox route through professional golf, but he's a 2-time major champion, right? So unbelievable. So I do love those guys too. So we're gonna flip it over to TGL. They have had 2 matches now, Tuesday night, primetime TV. We talked about it. What it essentially is arena golf. It's a really cool concept, and I want to see it be successful. But our first 2 matches have been a little soft, and I know you were a little bit outspoken on this one. So
no, yeah,
I don't share your opinion.
For golf, to me, I think you need the elements. I think it needs to be outside. I think you need to feel the fresh air, walking the course. I think that's part of golf. Like I think that's like the whole feeling and the vibe of golf. It's like you have to deal with the elements, and taking that away is like, I don't know. It just seems off. It's just different. It might be for another crowd. A lot of people might like it, like that interpersonal, because they're right there close and they could probably talk to the golfers, which is really cool. I love how the greens undulate, but there's something different when you get on a course and say you shank one in the rough, and now your feet are like here and the ball's like 2 feet below you. You got to figure out a way to like save par it with like 3 holes to go and you're leading. Like that's not going to happen in what this golf is.
That is one, the slope in hitting shots was one thing that I was thinking last night as I was watching them tee off on this par 4, and the ball ends up on this really hard side slope. Well, now you're not, they haven't done that to, although it probably wouldn't be that hard to create side slope off these lies that'll probably be the next thing that they look at doing, I might think, because you're perfectly flat with every swing you make, right? Except for the short game shots.
And my question too, like I know like the simulators are really good too, like with their tracking everything. But I would love to know like how accurate they actually are, because when you see the backspin, right, like how accurate is it, or where it's going to land on the green? And when you saw a few of his shots, it's like the ball rolled completely off, and I'm like, it's like I know this, like Tiger puts a ton of spin when he wants to, and it just didn't seem like how accurate that was, right?
Yeah, well, a lot of those things are determined by course condition, right? The amount of backspin you see a ball landing on the green. So whether the greens are soft, whether they're firm. And the other thing is how the club interacts with the ball. So if you have a very tight lie on the fairway, like a really closely cut fairway, your ball interacts, or your club interacts with the ball cleaner, which produces more spin. So as far as simulators go, like they have 18 of these monitors set up on these guys. I do believe it's accurate.
Okay.
Like it's 18 different monitors that are tracking this ball.
Yeah.
So as far as spin goes, like it'd be interesting if you could control the softness of the green and the way the ball lands on the green a little bit different. But I'm not questioning the accuracy. There was a couple of wedge shots that back to back that went a little long there in this week's TGL, which kind of got some funny reactions. But aside from that, like I think it's pretty accurate.
Yeah. Well, again, I think it's in its infancy. I think they probably got some quirks to move out. I feel like if you're going to make it that enclosed space, I'd love to see a little bit more of an interactive crowd. So there's like, I mean, in these, like, make it a soccer game where they've got a band playing in the background while the guys are hitting their ball. Like, make it like a party almost inside. Where
and really, this is going to be on the players to get it going.
Yeah.
I'll share a crazy idea I have with you. It's to just really blow up what we envision a golf course to be with this event. So you've got different cities that represent different teams. So this one's out there. It's outrageous. Home course, say it's the New York Golf Club, right? That's the home course. So you make this golf hole that runs through downtown New York. So your out of bounds is like the skyscrapers on either side.
Okay.
You following me here?
Yeah.
Like make it a normal fairway down the middle, but give it a New York feel for a home club. Yeah. Okay. But run it right through the city. Go through Central. Create a golf course that goes through Central Park.
I don't hate it. I don't hate it.
Why are we trying to recreate golf when it could be something like a golf course could be just so unique? Like I know they've done some really quirky holes, but I feel like you could make a decent golf hole by using the city that the team is from. This one's outrageous.
No, it's not that. It's not the dumbest
I'm expecting criticism on this one because it's out there.
That's good. All right, let's talk about Nick Taylor here.
Yeah, amazing win from Nick Taylor, Canadian, obviously at the Sony Open. So he puts himself in contention, and he's hitting a lot of quality shots coming in on the back nine, and he misses short putts on 15 and 60, and it looks like he's putted his way out of the tournament because those were certainly short putts that he missed for birdies on 15 and 16. And he makes a chip in eagle on 18 out of nowhere to put himself back in contention and then force a playoff, which he went birdie-birdie to win in. He's the kind of player, I think he's 3 out of 3 for 5 in playoff wins and multiple players. Obviously, the Canadian Open where he made that absolute bomb of a putt. But he seems like once he gets himself into that position, that he really has that clutch gene and really finds a way to hit the meaningful shot when it's necessary.
It's just nice to see a Canadian win at golf. Like I think I was growing up, it was Mike Weir, and now we've got someone that's back in it.
And there's been a strong contingent of, you know, a handful of Canadians for a bunch of years now, which is super exciting. So that's great with Nick there. Another win. I think what I saw was he's the third most winning male professional or PGA Tour wins of Canadians now. So you've got George Knudsen, who you may not be familiar with that name. Old school Canadian golfer, very successful career on the PGA Tour. Obviously, Mike Weir, and then Nick Taylor's right there now.
That's awesome
with them.
And
so
he's
that's
fairly
great.
young too. Like he's got to be what? He's under 30, no?
I think he'd be right around there. I didn't look it up.
Yeah. So he's in his prime. You could say like golfers' prime's what, like 25 to 35? Would you say?
Yeah. So traditionally, 25 would have even been a bit young, but we've seen younger players be successful. Think of Rory McIlroy, who was more successful like in his early 20s than he is now. Still an amazing player, but what's that?
How old's Scheffler right now?
Oh, he's younger. Yeah, he'd be 20, 26, 27.
Yeah.
But yeah, we have seen a trend of golfers being more successful younger. You think of Phil Mickelson. Phil Mickelson went for the longest time without winning a major championship, and then rattled off a handful later on in his career.
It's almost as if they get in their head too much when they get older, right? With the putting.
I mean, you can with golf, you can be in your head at any age, Danny.
Yes. Fair point, my friend. Fair point. Yeah.
Okay, so we've got another Canadian winner on the PGA Tour. The Sentry Tournament of Champions, the one at Kapalua in Hawaii, which is amazing scenery watching this tournament. Hideki Matsuyama, PGA Tour winner at the Sentry, 72-hole scoring record of minus 35.
Like that's a PGA record, no? Like that's like something that's never going to be like, what was the previous record before that? Minus
might have been 34 or 33, but just 72 holes in your minus 35.
Yeah, like it's insane. Like
it's insane.
It's insane. Like even at best ball, you take like a handful of really good scratch golfers. Like that would be difficult for 72 holes or no?
Oh, a scramble score. Yeah, it'd be doable, but you're
you guys could probably do it.
Quality golfers taking their best shot just to get
minus 35 to continue that for 4 days.
It's outrageous.
Every other hole, right? Like you'd have to think for sure he birdied every par 5, right? Like minimum. And he's had to have chip ins, but like every putt that he had within 5 feet had to be in. It was
for sure. Yeah.
Done.
And he did card a couple eagles. So, but yeah, it's every other hole you're.
In golf's not easy. Like even if it was an easy course, you still have to put the ball in the hole. Right? Like and what was the yardage on the course? Like it
it's actually long. There's a lot of elevation though. That 18th hole is straight downhill. There's often drives that are hit 400 plus on this hole. I mean, it's like a 650-yard hole, but you can find the speed slot and get this thing running down the hill.
But still, I do love his swing too. Like I'm a big fan of his like slow backswing and it like
the pause at the top.
The pause at the top. And, it is a really, really smooth thing. So it seemed like he was a nice little rhythm there that week. So moving on to the next topic here, a little bit heavier stuff, but I know you've got a little personal tie into this one. So you want to kick us off?
Yeah, the LA fires. I think what you're talking about, what I didn't tell you when I was telling you this, it was 20 years ago that my brother fought forest fires.
Oh, what are you talking about? I thought he was in the trenches.
No.
People don't know. Mark sent me a picture of this aerial photographer that this guy's in a helicopter looking over fires. And I'm like, oh my God, Mark, your brother's fighting forest fires in LA. But this was.
I just wanted to put you back on your heels. That's all.
Yeah. Well,
So my
awesome.
brother did fight forest fires up based out of Northern Ontario, obviously traveled, but and that picture of him flying over the fires,
Yeah.
he actually does live on the West Coast and did fly in and out of California, but he was not fighting the fires.
Like recently, in like the last little bit.
Yes, that was a fire in California that I
Yeah.
sent you of my brother's picture. He
Yeah.
took his kids to Disneyland and
Okay.
had flown over. Yeah.
I got a few questions on this, and maybe you can speak to it. So, from my understanding, that this
Are you
everything,
going tinfoil hat on me here?
I'm just trying to understand how that all happened. It's my understanding it's from winds.
So
Like,
I'll speak to what I know about Ontario forest fires, which is
yes.
not a whole lot.
Okay.
Often they're caused by either lightning or discarded cigarettes or like your personal fires that get out of control. So
What would you say is
human
like
caused
man-made?
or lightning.
Yeah, man-made. What would you say the percentage is in Ontario? Would you say?
I don't even want to give you a number on that.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
Gotcha.
because I really don't know. I'd be curious to know, or
Yeah.
curious what a lot of so it's Ministry of Natural Resources that fights our fires in Ontario. I'd be curious what their thoughts would be on what starts the majority of fires. So when we do get a drought and a dry spell in Ontario, forest fires, and a lot of our land here is untouched, right? So the majority of our population lives very close to the US border in Ontario. We've got a ton of land north that's untouched. So
Yeah.
when we get a drought, we get a lot of fires up in Northern Ontario.
Yeah. I guess my question is like, is anything preventable from these fires? Like these, is it with the weather and all these forests? Like you try not to go down rabbit holes here on YouTube, but like, is most of this stuff preventable?
Tough to cover all that. So if
Yeah.
drought is what brings the risk for fires out,
Yeah.
our method in Ontario is water bombers, right? Where have
Yeah.
you seen this?
Well, I've seen the
They skim
cartoon.
across the water and the water bomber picks up the water.
Yeah. Yeah. Like I've
And then
seen
they
it
go
on
and drop it.
cartoons there. The famous comedian does a voiceover in there. And so haven't seen it in person or on YouTube, but I've seen it on cartoons. It's pretty sweet.
Okay. So it is real life. It's not just a
Yeah.
cartoon.
No, it's not
So
just.
these planes are
Yeah.
super cool. And what
Yeah.
a talent those pilots have to skim across the water to pick the water up.
Right.
My goodness.
Yeah.
So if that's our method of fighting these fires, and that would be our method of dropping water on the areas to prevent the fires, like how much coverage would we need to put water down across Ontario?
Oh, we would need a dozen or like thousands of those little water bomber jets, right?
Yeah. Now the other method, I know that they call it a burnout. So you burn the area, controlled burn around the area that the fire is burning. So you burn that area off before the fire reaches it, so that it's already burnt in that area to have the fire just extinguish itself.
Yeah, I've seen that in the movie that covers that as well in my cartoon movie that I've watched with he's 11 now or 12 now, but he was 5 or 6 at the time, and I still remember that movie. But yeah,
I love how accurate it was.
We're laughing and we're joking about it now, but it's devastating to see some of what's going on right now in LA. And I feel that I couldn't imagine. And I live north of the city, and I've got an abundance of trees around me, and I couldn't imagine if everything went on fire, like everything would be lost. And I feel for the families out there.
These scenes that you're seeing from out there are just, it's tough to believe that these fires are reaching such a metropolitan area.
It looks like hell. If you think of what hell would look like that would be it. Like everything's just on fire. And it's like, It doesn't seem like there's no end in sight. Like there's not going to be rain for weeks. And it's just spreading. And one of my first seasons was out in Bakersfield, actually, which is an hour and a half away from where it is now. And it's just really sad. And you just hope everybody can come out that, like, I know there's been some deaths, but like for the most part, like I know this is the biggest natural disaster I think in the U.S., from what we've seen, at least from a forest fire, in history. So, yeah, you just hope that the people can, or the community can come together and help other people out, because it's really sad.
It really is. We have sent Canadian forest firefighters down there. Like, some of our bombers are assisting down there. I did see that, which is wonderful. And hopefully Donald Trump sees that we're providing aid and knows that we're trying to be good neighbors.
Yeah, we'll see. I mean, it's coming back to those water bombers. I mean, it's right there on the Pacific. So, I mean, there's plentiful of water to take from. And yeah, let's just hope.
That's the other thing, that we're really fortunate in Ontario, our abundance of lakes that these planes can drop down into and collect the water.
Yeah, absolutely. I think we need, after seeing this, I think we'd, I mean, at least as a country or even as a province, to get more in training. Absolutely.
Yeah. So we dabbled a little bit politically there. I brought up Mr. Trump, President Trump. So we're going to full on lean into it, and we're going to send it over to Kathy Brock, who is a retired professor at Queen's University in political science and policy studies. So we'll send it over to Kathy now.
Really looking forward to this one.
So Danny and I would like to welcome our next guest, Kathy Brock, who's recently retired professor at Queen's University with policy studies in the Department of Political Studies. So we're going to be speaking politics and having Kathy unpack everything that's happening globally and in Canada for us. We're going to do politics for dummies here for Danny and I, and we brought in an expert. She's been featured on CBC, all of our major media outlets. So we brought in a real pro for this one. Welcome, Kathy.
Thanks so much, Mark. Hi, Danny.
So, hey, Kathy. I'm so excited to talk about these politics today. It is such a hot topic in Canada, and for the longest time, Canadian politics was so boring. But I feel like we're a soap opera right now. So,
we are.
So I'm excited to dive into it. We got plenty to talk about, and I know our listeners, it would be nice to maybe speak in layman's terms so everybody can understand, because sometimes there's so much media and there's so much information out there. So we just want to give everybody the big picture and the small picture of what's going on.
So the recent one this week was that the premiers were pushing back sort of towards the U.S. and the incoming President Trump with something that they signed. Kathy, can you unpack that for us? And seemed like the Alberta premier held back on signing whatever agreement this was.
So basically what our leaders have been doing, what the premiers have been doing, is pushing for the federal government to take action, because it has been slow, because it's been caught up in the leadership dilemma for the Liberal Party. So the premiers put a lot of pressure on Ottawa that we need a strong answer to Trump and his proposal to impose tariffs on Canada, which are going to have a significant effect on us. Now, most of the premiers, with the exception of the premier from Alberta, agreed that we should move ahead with tariffs up to and including measures like restricting our oil and gas exports to the United States. That's the backbone of the Alberta economy. And quite frankly, it's also the backbone of our general Canadian economy. So Premier Daniel Smith is saying, we aren't going to threaten that at this point. Now, there are a couple of ways you could take that position, though. Well, what I've seen so far in the media is people are saying, oh, the Premier of Alberta should not be doing this. It's the wrong message. It shows that we're divided. However, we're dealing with Donald Trump. Donald Trump is the master of diversions, of instability in negotiations, because that's how he wins. So if our Prime Minister and Premier play this well, they could use Alberta being offside as a trump card with Donald Trump. So they could say, listen, we're really on side with you, and have Doug Ford doing the, soft part where he says, we really are on side, we want to be partners, we want to be friends, but we are going to impose tariffs right back at you. And then have Daniel Smith come up and say, well, but not necessarily oil and gas. So then they can go back to Trump and say, give us some concessions here, and we won't impose the tariffs that include restricting exports to the United States on all commodities that we choose. So they could actually use this division to bargain with Trump and also get her to win his confidence, and so that he then trusts her a little more, talks to her, and she can be the broker for a deal along with the other premiers coming along after.
Good cop, bad cop scenario.
You know what? It is. It really could be. And it was funny. I laughed when I saw that she was the one who went down to Mar-a-Lago, because when I put together my dream team of negotiators with the United States, it did include Doug Ford and the Premier of Alberta, because I thought she could play this role with him beautifully. And she can speak to him in his language, I think, quite effectively, because that's what she's been doing her entire career.
With the oil and gas coming out of Alberta, it just seems like that's kind of our golden ticket here in Canada that gets traded to the United States. As far as like what you said, the diversion with Trump for threatening the tariffs, what do you think his real motive is for the tariffs? Like if that's kind of the bait, what do you think Trump's really looking to get out of Canada?
Probably some concessions in some areas. One of the things you have to think about with what's happening, though, is, as former Prime Minister Jean Chrétien said earlier this week, every prime minister has always had to deal with the United States on trade and tariff. And at different times, the United States has pushed back very hard against us. And there's always been talk of annexing Canada, or I remember back in the 90s when there was a proposal in Congress that they should send up the troops and take Canada over. And, people were worried then, but it just blew over. Some of this is just bombastic rhetoric, and some of it is that Donald Trump wants Canada to make some trade concessions, but in particular, he wants the border secured and for us to work together on smuggling people, drugs, etc., those issues. Some of this will also be going into the free trade negotiations that we're going to be entering in the next year. He wants to split Canada off from Mexico, which he's done very effectively. We are now not going to be bargaining together against the United States, and that gives the United States a stronger position so that they can get trade concessions they want for their industries. Now, one other thing I would add is, when Donald Trump was in office the first time, I was working on some research that compared actually Trump and Trudeau and their political strategies, because they were very, very similar on how they got elected, believe it or not. And I went down to the State Department and I was talking to people in the State Department and I said, well, how much are you affected by Donald Trump? Have you found that it's very difficult to work with him as president? And the response I kept getting back was, no, he will have certain key issues, certain key ideas that you need to respond to. Otherwise, it's business as usual, and he lets things just proceed. It's not as disruptive as people say. So with that in mind, with Donald Trump, his advisors right now are looking at more limited tariffs, not tariffs right across the board. Some of those are going to be in the areas where Canada's vulnerable, but they won't be right across the board. And that gives Canada some room to negotiate. So Alberta might say, okay, we aren't touching oil and gas, but then Ontario and Quebec could say, but hydroelectricity can be cut off.
Gotcha.
And one of my friends who has been involved a lot in government relations in Canada and the US relations said, one idea would be just to give the Americans advance notice of this, and then to cut off all hydroelectricity exports to the United States for a 2-hour period on, say, a Wednesday morning, and then see how quickly Donald Trump comes to the negotiating table.
Wow.
That's pretty drastic.
Yeah. What did you make of Donald Trump's remark about making Canada like the 51st state? And do you think there's any legs to it?
I don't, for a number of reasons. We are too difficult to govern. He just looks up at here and sees this huge landmass, how few people we have, and he realizes that would be one more nightmare that he really doesn't need at this point. Plus, we're such a complex, diverse society. So I chuckled about that, but I do think he began that joke because he really wanted to get back at our prime minister, because our prime minister was not kind to Donald Trump when he left office the first time. So a little bit of payback, but also it's part of his negotiating strategy where you keep your opponents off kilter a little bit and wondering what you're doing. And certainly it's worked. People have gotten very upset about it.
Is he strategic in thinking, okay, I'm going to stir something up here to go after something else, like border control?
Yeah. He, the art of negotiation, it's in his books. And we've known about it, ever since he was on TV and stuff. He always likes to distract with one hand and then take with the other hand while you're watching this hand. So I think this is a red herring that he was floating. But also, I think with Donald Trump, I've heard that people say he's got a wicked sense of humor when you get to know him personally. And I think he's just having a lot of fun with this too.
Justin Trudeau obviously announced that he will step down once there's a new Liberal Party leader assigned. Why did he decide this now and not earlier when the Liberals started their popularity decline?
I think Justin Trudeau, up to even today, probably believes he could still win the election and that he would be the best choice for Canadians. So the logical time for him to have resigned would have been last summer, but he didn't resign. He instead said, no, we're going to stay on and fight. But he also seemed tired because he should have had a reorganization of cabinet in the middle of the summer, or in the fall at the very latest. And he also should have rolled out a new plan with some new priorities for his government, which he also didn't do. So he seemed a bit tired and his government seemed tired. So for him to go now, it was because what can happen in Canadian politics is if a prime minister loses the support of cabinet and caucus, that prime minister cannot stay. Jean Chrétien faced that in part. People tend to forget when he left, it was because he didn't have the support. In contrast, Brian Mulroney, who had dropped lower in the polls than Justin Trudeau, was able to hang on because his caucus believed in him. So Trudeau didn't have much of a choice. He had to step out at this time.
Right. With him stepping, who do you see as successors in the Liberal Party? And can you see perhaps Justin trying to run again if nobody steps up? Because you hear rumors of these potential candidates running as a leader for Liberals, and then a few days later, they're hanging in their resignation. So, can you shed some light on what's going on in the Liberal Party right now?
People are vying for positions moving forward. People are also thinking, if the government loses, do they really want to be leader of the party at this time? So you see two types of contenders going in. Some who are going to be playing the long game and hoping they get cabinet seats down the road. And then some people are more serious. And it looks like if she declares Chrystia Freeland against Mark Carney, what the Liberals cannot afford right now is to have a coronation so that there's only one candidate. If Chrystia Freeland doesn't go in, then they've got to look at who else they can get into this and have a really good competitive race. Otherwise, Canadians are going to question the results again. So it's kind of fascinating to see. It looks like Mark Carney is the front runner, but anything can happen in politics, as we see with the former Premier of BC, Christy Clark, who had to withdraw her, who decided to withdraw her name from the race.
Yeah, I mean, can you see a scenario where nobody's going to run for the leader as they're not confident maybe the Liberals are going to win this upcoming election? Can you see a scenario where that happens?
No, you always get someone who will step up, but then you might not get the leader you really want and the party needs at this point.
Right.
This is a really critical time for the Liberals, and it's important for them to get someone who can unite the party. Right now, the Liberals are in decline. They're more vulnerable than they've been for a very long time. And they've got to reorient the party if they're going to reoccupy the center and come back and be able to attract support away from the NDP and the Conservatives in the future. They have quite the task ahead of them. And the party, there's going to be some dividing in it. So you need a leader who's going to be charismatic, who can talk to people, who reaches out to them, and who can bring the party along and offer a new vision for the future. Part of the trouble that the Liberals ran into was they moved away from their base, but also they moved to the left at a time when the Canadian population has been moving more to a new center. And we see the same thing happening in the United States. It's part of the reason why Doug Ford and Donald Trump, Daniel Smith, why these people are getting elected. There's a new center. The Canadian public, like the American public, if the polling is accurate of opinions, in both countries, it's showing that the public is a little ahead of the parties in figuring out a new center. People tend to want politics that are pragmatic and where there's compromise, and people are getting things done rather than ideological yelling at each other. So, for example, what we're seeing now is people are saying, okay, immigration is good, but too much immigration that is not attached to the needs of Canada or the United States is a problem. It needs to be managed. Mm-hmm. People say, we want business. Yes, we want a strong economy, but big business become too powerful. So we want policies that are much more pragmatic and addressed at making our country stronger. And that's more diverse, more inclusive, but with some type of vision in mind as well.
Do you think Chrystia Freeland stepping down Minister of Finance was strategic to be that final blow to our Prime Minister?
Definitely. Anyone who's watched Chrystia Freeland for any amount of time, 5 minutes even, you know this is one tough woman who is, yes, loyal. Yes, she was very loyal to Trudeau as she was to her previous organization, but she's not someone who likes to be pushed around. And I know when I heard that the Zoom meetings were going on and she was called in by Zoom and she was going to be pushed out, I thought, oh, I hope they've got a backup plan for this, because I couldn't see her going into the House of Commons and defending a budget where she had been told to put some measures in, in the economic update with which she did not agree. So, and they gave her all weekend to think about her plan. So she came up with a brilliant plan, even down to when she timed the release of her statement that she was resigning. And I think that showed how tired the center of the government has become, the fact that they missed the signals that were there.
But I think Canada is in need of a leader more than at any point that I can remember. Obviously, you got the NDP and the Conservatives. Can you shed a little bit of light on the NDP and the Conservatives and kind of what you think they're standing for and what kind of leadership they're providing and where they would ultimately, what their selling points are coming into the next election?
Sure. One of the things I would start with too is that everybody would know this, of course, just it's nothing profound. The Conservatives need a strong NDP because a strong NDP takes votes away from the Liberals and it makes it easier for the Conservatives to come into power. So it's interesting because in this period, there's a way in which the NDP and the Conservatives are going to be fighting each other, but on the other hand, still wanting each other to be there. There's a interesting tension in that relationship. With the NDP, Jagmeet Singh has really got to do some careful planning to distance himself from the Liberals while still managing to take credit for the policies that the Liberals put through under their agreement. And that's very tough because the Liberal Party traditionally has always been much stronger at getting the credit for anything it adopts from the NDP platform. So he's going to have to convince Canadians that he can be a strong leader in his own right. And there are some divisions in the NDP that are going to make that tough to do. That you've got the ideologues there, and then you've got the more pragmatic NDPers. And I just spoke about the new center that's developing in Canadian politics. If the NDP want to gain seats, if they want to up their polling numbers, then they are going to have to move to the center in that pragmatism more. And that traditionally has caused divisions within the party. So I think they're going to be facing an uphill battle. The Conservatives are in a better position right now because they've been coming up in the polls. They're running very strong. They've been holding at a pretty high level for a while, but they haven't been the center of media attention and their policies haven't been tested yet. When they start to roll out their ideas and that gives the Liberals a target, gives the NDP a target, and in Quebec, the Bloc a target, then they're going to face a much tougher time. So it's going to be hard for them. Also, Pierre Poilievre he's an interesting person. I was very impressed by the book that came out on Pierre Poilievre. It's actually worth a read. It's a quick book to read. And it gives you a sense of why he wants to be prime minister and the amount of work that he does. He is a real workhorse when it comes to policy, and he prepares himself really well. But the other side of it is people find that he's a little too strident, that he is a little too quick with quips that are a little too cutting at time. And that's why you've seen all the ads rolling out in the last year where they've tried to soften his image. So he's going to have to balance the image and the impression that people have created of him so far with a more prime ministerial image that you need to occupy that office. That's going to be his challenge, and then to be able to defend the policies. I'm less worried about him defending the policies because he does do his homework. He'll be able to debate things and come up with some good facts. He just has to avoid those really cutting quips that some people say, oh, that just goes a bit too far.
How would you see, assuming our next federal government is conservative, how would you see Pierre Poilievre transitioning into more of a our more traditional prime minister appeal?
That will be an interesting transition to see, because he's very thoughtful. He'll be planning it now. He'll be reaching out to some people for advice on how to do this well. He's been doing it so far. And the Conservatives have been in power recently enough so that they do have that pool of talent who can give him good advice. The very first thing I'll be watching with fascination is, if he comes in as prime minister, who's in his cabinet? Because he'll have some good choices, some really good people to choose from. But he also, my impression is that he will remember people who didn't support him when he thought they should have. And those people might not get the tap on the shoulder to become a cabinet minister. And sometimes that can create a cabinet that's slightly off balance. So that's one thing I'll be watching with him. The other thing that I think is going to be really tough for him, and it's part of the reason why the Conservatives have been slow to roll out their policies, is the Liberals are leaving a deficit behind. We don't really know the size of what that deficit is going to be and the debt load, and neither do the Conservatives. They've got to see that when they get into office, and that's why sometimes when governments come in, their policies change, or people say, well, they didn't do what they said they were going to. They can't, given the way the books are left, or some policies are embedded and they're going to be too hard to change. So sometimes governments have to back off policies. But then the key thing for any new government, and this is what the Conservatives are going to have to do if they want to succeed, you've got to explain clearly without looking like you're being false in any way. Just got to tell Canadians why we can't do this policy at this time, but here's the answer, and here's how the government has listened to people and tried to do what people want. Mm-hmm. So it's going to be interesting to watch him come in and to see how he handles things. One mistake that Justin Trudeau made right at the outset, I believe, and this we could debate, it's a long one, but we could debate it, is when he came in, he wanted advisors to be all under the age of 40. And he moved out the traditional advisors in the party and replaced them with younger people, which is great because you want new ideas, you want that energy, you want that enthusiasm, you want the different perspectives. But often it's those more experienced people who know how to get things done and who to tap on the shoulder when you need a critical decision to be made, or when you need to get something through the public service, and how to do it effectively. So I hope Poilievre has a mixture of really experienced people and, the younger people. He's really attracting the younger crowd, and he knows how to speak to people of the generations between 18 and 35. So I hope he has a really good mix of people and he learns from where Justin Trudeau went wrong.
Sounds like Pierre is the front runner. It'll be interesting when politicians do get into power. We've seen this with other people that do get into power. They say one thing, but then do another. And, Trump is what he is, but that's one thing I think he's done when he got in, is like everything he said he was going to do before he got in, he did when he was in. So it'll be interesting when Pierre does, if and when he does take over, if he's going to do that. I know some of the major issues right now in Canada that he says he's going to fix are the carbon tax, the housing affordability issue, immigration. And right now, with the uprising of, our dollar is probably the lowest it's been in years, and the imposing tariffs. So it'll be interesting to see what he does when he does get in office and how quickly he'd be able to implement his thinking or his plans. Maybe you can, I know that was a long-winded question, but I think those are the four that I think Canadians are really worried about. One is the carbon tax, the housing affordability, and immigration are the three main topics you think that Pierre really, I think, shines through when it comes to debating. Can you talk a little bit of what he's planning to do, and do you think he'll be able to do it if he gets elected?
I think one of the things we're going to see is he's going to carry through on the carbon tax and the capital gains tax. What he said about tax the tax, and those two make sense. One of the things he's going to learn from too is previous governments. So remember when the Liberals came in, and it was after Brian Mulroney had put in the GST, and the Liberals said they were going to axe it, and then they didn't.
Mm-hmm.
And Canadians were furious. And certainly Sheila Cox from Hamilton got caught in that. So I think on a policy like that, which is something that's pretty straightforward, the government got to carry through on it. He's going to have to carry through on those. Housing, though, that's a provincial area of responsibility. The federal government can only do so much. So that's an area where he better be treading carefully and working with the provinces and the municipalities. I mean, you guys know more about the housing market than most federal politicians do, I would say.
Yeah.
And so the federal government has to be very careful with that area in particular. The dollar, the trade negotiations, and what happens with the United States are going to be critical there. And so he's got to be prepared to talk to Donald Trump, and he's going to be watching the United States very carefully. The one thing we do know, and you can really see this with probably Doug Ford is the best example of this right now. If the government can't do something, you apologize and you own it. So you don't give a weak apology or a non-apology. You just say, in the language of Premier Ford, it would be, folks, I screwed up. So we're not going to do that. And for Pierre Poilievre, he won't use that language. He would probably say, okay, we thought we could go ahead with this. We can't for these reasons. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
If he can do that, people accept it.
I think if Canadians would respect it so much more if a politician came up and said, you know what, I messed up here, my mistake, instead of just making something up or directing it elsewhere. But I think it'd be refreshing to hear some kind of ownership for something that goes wrong.
Exactly. And, even Danny, when you mentioned about Trump, he doesn't say, I'm sorry, but he'll say, well, we're not doing that. Yeah. And he doesn't give a false apology. He doesn't make an excuse. And then he just moves on. And I think people respect that a little bit more as well, rather than an apology, but then the government doesn't seem to learn from it, or it doesn't seem to take it to heart. Mm-hmm. So I think the government, there's a new style of talking. And what I notice with my students is they want you to be direct with them, and they respect it more if you just say an outright no, but then you tell them why. And that generation likes the tough talk to a certain extent.
It seems like what we know as mainstream media, like our big network channels, seem to be in a bit of a decline right now. Like cable news, and certainly locally, we're not getting nearly the coverage that we used to. And a lot of our social media platforms seem to be picking up on a lot of, our politics now, which is scary because it's not as fact checked. Meta announced, it was this week or last week, that they're really scaling back on their fact checking to the point that maybe not fact checking. They don't believe it's their position to fact check. How do we personally be careful about how we're consuming our media to not be, slanted too hard one way or the other, and keep a critical eye on what we're consuming and believing to be true?
Well, that's a tough one, Mark, because things are changing so much. The good part of it is we're getting a lot more perspectives included all the time. And I think that's really important. We do need to watch what is being said and use diverse sources. One of the things I do notice with students, and one thing that's really changed over the past 10 years, is how many different sources that they will actually use for their news. And they do this more naturally than generations that were there, say 15 to 10 years ago. So check different sources, try to see what's being said. But one thing I have noticed is that we're seeing, even with the fact checking that was going on, the media was sometimes getting their facts wrong, and they were, under the guise of being objective, they were feeding a bias in. Even small things, like this morning on CBC, someone referred to Doug Ford's cap, the cap that he wore to the ministers, or to the meeting with the premiers. And they said, it had 1861 on the cap. And I thought, wait a minute, that can't be right. They must have meant 1867, because that's when Canada became a country.
Yeah.
And they had a basic fact like that wrong. So I think it's always good to be a little bit of a skeptic. You can look up some things, they're facts, but then just get diverse perspectives and then look for that sweet spot of compromise. And even when you're debating with people, try to find that sweet spot where there's overlap between the two views, and you're more likely to be right or wrong when you do that. Right then wrong when you do that. But stay away from the really extreme feeds, or use them. What I do is, with some of the feeds that have really strong views, I go to them because I want to hear what's being said on that side. And then I will go to another one on the other side and see what's being said, and then look for what seems to be the most logical position coming out of them. And I think that can give you a much more balanced answer.
Not to go too much on Donald Trump in the United States, but they had an interesting idea where they said that Elon Musk will be head of the Department of Government Efficiency, where they're going to be overhauling basically the government spending and seeing where all these dollars are going to within their government. Do you think Canada should have such a department where they're, looking at the books and seeing how much money is actually spent on bureaucracy and salaries, to see if maybe we could cut some efficiency? Because ultimately, the more we spend, it comes back to the taxpayer that has to foot the bill. So can you maybe shed some light, or what your thoughts are going forward on that?
Sure. Okay, my views are a little bit controversial here. People, so you can push back on this. When Donald Trump announced that he was putting together the Government Agency on Efficiency, and he chose Elon Musk, I was actually quite happy for this reason. And that is, and this is where Canada could learn from the United States and what's happening. First of all, this is going to be an advisory body. You've got two people, one who's an expert on the use of artificial intelligence and government efficiency, and the other one who is an expert on government efficiency. So together, you've got two interesting people who are going to be in an advisory capacity. So if the Trump administration handles it well, they will then run this by senior people in the public service with experience in government who can see what can be implemented, what can't. But the reason why I really like the appointment of Elon Musk is Canada and the United States, and other countries too, we're not unique in this, have failing grades when it comes to the use of artificial intelligence in government, when it can be used and how it can be used appropriately. This is where you really could use that talent in the private sector to advise government. And the way we've done it in the past, and where, because the Trudeau Liberal government tried to do this recently, and they tried to introduce efficiencies and use artificial intelligence more. They've been trying to integrate it with the Canadian, into the Canadian policy process much more effectively. It's also resulted in some contracts that have gone out of control, and we've seen the scandals that have erupted over the spending, right from pay systems into procurement of government. So having someone like Elon Musk head up that task force means you're getting the private sector advice, but without those exorbitant fees. So if you could bring in people from the private sector in Canada on an advisory council on how to use artificial intelligence in a realistic way in government, then you can get that knowledge without the contracts that you don't know how to frame at this point because you don't have the knowledge of artificial intelligence in that industry. So this, I think, could be something that works well in Canada and the United States. Also, it comes at a time when it's really important because, as we know, the working population is shrinking compared to the rest of the population, but the use of artificial intelligence means that we won't need the same number of bodies doing jobs if it's brought in well. And that means just through natural attrition, people retiring, like me, from the educational sector, or people who are leaving naturally to go elsewhere, then you can replace those positions with more efficient systems that rely on artificial intelligence. And some really good things are being done. One of the things that I thought was fascinating is a couple of years ago, coming out of Alberta, a couple of my colleagues did a study to see who could write a better policy brief to cabinet, artificial intelligence or an actual policy analyst. And so they commissioned a whole group of deputy ministers to read briefs that were prepared by policy analysts, artificial intelligence, and then a brief that was prepared by artificial intelligence but improved by the policy analyst. And right across the board, the favored brief was the one where you do the initial work through artificial intelligence and then have a human refine it. And so that would save a lot of work. They found that what it would take an analyst 2 weeks to do the research on, artificial intelligence could do in less than an hour. So that would create the economies and help us deal with the pending labor shortage.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah, and Danny and I are encouraged to use AI in our industries also. And when I get into this topic with people, that's what I explain it. Like, it's not something that I can't do. It just collapses our time and makes us more efficient. So I can really relate to what you're saying there. US politics over the last decade has seemingly become more polarizing, and we're starting to see that obviously in Canada also. Do you have an opinion on how we can bring our parties a little bit closer together?
Listen to the public. That would be my key position on that. Because when you do surveys of public opinion, people really are looking for pragmatic compromises, not ideological positions that lead all in one direction. So people are saying, if you listen to the public and if you talk to people, whether it's at the curling club or when you're downtown at a cafe or something, people say, look, We want an equitable society. People should not be treated badly because of their race, their skin color, their religion, whatever background. We want people to be treated decently, but we also want everyone to be included. So, traditional people as well as, newcomers to Canada. It's very pragmatic. And essentially, people are saying we want families to be supported. We don't want kids to be in poverty. So we do want some higher taxes, but we also want taxes that are fair to families that are working and trying hard to make a better living. Mm-hmm. And even in the United States, something I thought was really fascinating after the election was listening to some of the people from the Black and Latin American community who came out and said why they supported the Republicans and Donald Trump. And a couple of people said it really clearly that what we want is a fair opportunity to get ahead in life without all the regulations and restrictions that have been put in place. We want to be able to succeed the way that people could in the past so that we can better the country, but also the position for our families. And so I think if we start to look at some of the solutions that people are advocating for, which is, a social safety net, a good healthcare system that people pay into, but one in which we expect everyone to contribute to, then I think the parties could move in that direction. And what we've seen historically is parties do tend to follow public opinion at key points like this, and they'll eventually catch up. Our parties just have to catch up at this point.
Nice. We've got your time here for 46 minutes now. I would love to hear maybe your thoughts here before we let you go. Just what you think here over the next coming little bit. Maybe explain the prorogue. Parliament's set to come back in March. Just let our listeners know what the next few months look like in Canada.
Well, this is one thing that's going to be interesting to watch because Parliament is not in session. And one of the things that the media hasn't been picking up on as much is the fact checker in our society is Parliament. Parliament is the eyes on government and what government's doing and the decisions it's making. Whenever we suspend Parliament, whether it was during the pandemic or even now, when Parliament is suspended until the government comes back or calls it back, and that's going to be March 24th, that's a long time when we don't have people standing up in Parliament and saying to the government, justify what you're doing and also tell us what you're doing. So this is something that I find very worrisome because members of Parliament and the opposition, whether it's the Bloc, the NDP, or the Conservatives, ask tough questions of government that the public finds out and the media picks up its stories and then can run with them as well. So we're not going to have Parliament there. That means Canadians have to be vigilant and hoping that the government does come out, make what it's doing more notable to them. So Parliament suspended. We aren't going to have that source of information on the government. And we're going to see the government moving ahead. The premiers have taken up a bit of this role, and they're going to be a conduit into seeing what the federal government is doing with respect to the United States. So that's going to be really important to see. Now, as I understand it this morning, I haven't seen this verified again yet, but the Prime Minister has said he's not going to run in the next election now. So when Donald Trump comes in the United States, he's going to be facing a Prime Minister of Canada that is facing a leadership race, but is also not expected to run again. and he's going to exploit that weakness in Canada. So the Prime Minister needs agreement from the premiers going ahead to deal with the United States, and then has got to use any differences among the premiers strategically to negotiate for more concessions from the United States than fewer. But we'll watch the Liberal race with real interest. The policies are going to be affected by what happens in the United States. And I think we're probably going to see the Conservatives towards the end of February, March, roll out some of their key ideas to get ready for an election campaign. It's going to be an interesting time in that way. And we'll also see Jagmeet Singh trying to roll out his policies and try to have an influence on what the Liberals do. Quebec is also going to be key. So watch for any policies coming from the feds that are directed at Quebec.
Well, Kathy, it's been a pleasure having you on. I'm really looking forward to what's going to happen ahead. There's a lot of moving parts, obviously, with all four parties and the Liberals, NDP, Bloc, Conservatives. When do you think we can see an election here in Canada? I guess is the main question that a lot of people would want to know, even though there might be not any definitive answer. But what's the most likely date and time?
That's a good way to put that question too, because nobody knows, but it looks like it's going to be called very quickly after the leadership for the Liberals has concluded. And it could even be called before they bring Parliament back. The federal government, the Prime Minister, with a new leader of the Liberals, could go into the Governor General and say, I do not believe I have a mandate. And that would be a valid reason for the Governor General to dissolve Parliament and agree to have an election. So that will be interesting to see. The other question, of course, is, will there be an Ontario election that's squeezed in there? That makes it really tough because it means that the parties are going to be using the same people for two elections, and that's tough on volunteers and it affects voter turnout. So that would be interesting. The last thing I would leave you with is, in the federal election, who actually gets out and votes? That's going to be very important. Who's inspired to vote and who stays home? If people are really disaffected with the Liberals still, they might stay home, and that could cause them to decline even further. Or with a new leader, people might say, all right, let's give them a shot. So it's kind of interesting, but I suspect we're going to see an election called late March, early April, the latest.
Kathy, your advice of why don't you take what what would say the far left would be saying, and then take what the far right is saying, and then maybe make up your own opinions and what's in the middle, and in how it kind of affects Canadians. Because I think you're right. I think what Canadians are just looking for is a fair opportunity to get ahead. And I think in the last 2 years, ever since I've been a Canadian, it's been pretty tough. So I think we're all looking for some good news here in 2025.
I agree, Danny. Thank you.
Well, Kathy, thanks for coming on Pucks, Putts, and Properties. I know Mark is busy here, but this is one of my favorites. I could talk politics all day, and I know you do this for a living. So again, appreciate your time, appreciate your insights and coming on. And it's been lovely.
It has been really nice, and I appreciate you guys asking me and giving me the opportunity. So thank you so much.
Awesome. Well, you have a great day, and I'm sure we'll see you around Kingston.
Two real estate agents of romance, so true. Danny and Mark, seeing them through. Mark the curler, the golfer, the fisherman bold. Danny the goalie, with a story to be told.